As a constitutional law attorney, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hey guys, I'm Auron MacIntyre sitting in for Jenna Ellis. She was kind enough to have me today. I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about the nature of the Constitution. Why does it seem like guys like Joe Biden just run roughshod over it? We'll get into all of that right after this.
With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
Hey guys, so I'm Auron MacIntyre. Jenna was kind enough to have me on. I have my own podcast over on The Blaze. So of course, if you like what you hear today, please go ahead and check out the Auron MacIntyre Show. So today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the nature of the Constitution. I'm sure everybody watching this show cares deeply about the Constitution. It's obviously one of our key founding documents, and it's really important to conservatives that we go ahead and uphold the spirit of the Constitution and the way of life that we feel is bound to it, that was passed down to us from our founding fathers. And I think this is critical because when we look at today's society, when we look at the way that people like Joe Biden and his corrupt Department of Justice, the FBI, the way that they treat their political opposition, the way that they treat people like former President Trump, we often look at that and we say, hey, that's unconstitutional. That is something that violates the Constitution. But despite the fact that we hold up the Constitution and say, hey, this is being violated, you're doing something wrong here, they still seem to get away with this. I mean, all you have to do is look back at COVID, right? You think about all these restrictions, all these things that you thought could never happen in your country, the way that churches were shut down, pastors were arrested, people were basically forced to stay in their homes, they were threatened with vaccine mandates. All of these things occurred despite the fact that constitutional guarantees protect your rights. So what's happening with that? Why did the Constitution seem to lose its ability to protect us when it's supposed to be the law of the land? So when we look at the Constitution, I think it's really essential for us to think about what a Constitution is. Now, we, of course, think of the Constitution as a central document, but some people often think of it as a sacred document. But of course, that's not exactly right. The Constitution is something that was written down by men. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about a political philosopher by the name of Joseph de Maistre. Joseph de Maistre thought a lot about the nature of political constitutions. And he said that while we might have a formal piece of paper that's written down, we might write something down called the Constitution, the actual constitution of the country doesn't come from men. He thought the actual constitution of a country came from God. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, of course the Constitution was written down by men. Auron, I remember I paid attention in history class. I learned about Hamilton and Madison and Jay and the Federalist Papers. So they wrote down the physical Constitution. But for Joseph de Maistre, he said, no man has ever written down a constitution. No constitution is ever constructed by men, because men do not construct their own values, their own culture, their own beliefs, their own religion. The culture that they are born into, the things that surround them, those emanate from the character of the people that is given to them by God, by their divine creator. And so while a group of people might eventually get around a table and write down something about the Constitution, what they're really doing is just codifying the traditions, the folkways, the beliefs, the character, the culture of the people who live in that society. And that's a really important difference, because that means that the binding power of the Constitution is not just the words on paper. And I think that's a problem for some conservatives, because when we look at the Constitution, it's very easy to get legalistic. We say, okay, no, we have, these different rights. They're written down. There's these articles about the way that the branches are supposed to work. I even have a Bill of Rights at the end that tell me all the things the government is not allowed to do. But really, all of those things, while they are powerful and meaningful, the only reason that they were powerful and that they were meaningful is that they were communicating a value system that was born into the nature, the character of our founders, of the founding stock of the United States by God. He had gifted those people that set of beliefs, that understanding of the world, those traditions, that way of life. And because they received those values from their creator, they were then able to translate them into a document that enumerated those things. But the power of the document is not the enumeration. It's not the words on the page. It's the spirit, it's the belief, it's the truth that is communicated by the culture from which those were born. So, what does the Constitution actually do? Does the Constitution just tell us the way that the United States should work? Is it just a instruction manual? No, it's something far more important. You see, the Constitution doesn't make the culture. It doesn't make the people. The people and the culture, they make the Constitution. What binds the people together, what makes the Constitution a powerful and important document, is the shared value system that undergirds it. And of course, the founding fathers knew this. This is not something that I'm just telling you. It's not something that even Joseph de Maistre dreamed up. The founders themselves told us about this. People like John Adams said that the Constitution is only meant for a virtuous and religious people. He understood that the Constitution was not going to make people virtuous, that the Constitution's existence and the rules written down and the mechanics of the Constitution were not the key factor in creating a free and prosperous country. The key factor was the people themselves, the fact that the people had a religion, the people had a shared culture and faith and understanding of the norms that should be allowed inside the United States. That's what made the Constitution important. And he said, without a belief in the Ten Commandments, without that religion, without that shared culture and faith and way of being that was communicated through the traditions of the people who settled the United States, the Constitution was simply not useful. He said specifically, it's not good for governing any other population than the one that has these virtues and these beliefs. And so it is that binding culture that really makes the Constitution work. And that's really important, because when we look at what's happening today and we wonder, well, why isn't the Biden administration paying attention to whether or not what they're doing is constitutional? Why don't corporations care? Why doesn't the FBI care? Why doesn't the CIA care? Why don't these local governments care about the violations of my rights? And the answer is that the only reason the Constitution actually binds the actions of the government is when the people collectively share one unified understanding of morality and the way, the kind of the moral vision of the country. That's really critical. If these things fall into dispute, if there are multiple factions vying for the basic meanings of moral concepts, then the Constitution itself starts to lose the context in which it could be enforced. Because again, the Constitution doesn't rule the people. It is the people that brought forth the language and the values that then formed the Constitution. And it was an enumeration of those things. That's why our founders believed that there could be limited government. That's why they believed that there could be a smaller government because they believed that the people were virtuous enough that they would self-govern, that they would be bound by their own religion, by their own beliefs, by their own understanding of the good and the beautiful and the true, and that their pursuit of those things, that context for their liberty would limit their own actions. You see, freedom is not an unmitigated good. That's not how the ancients would have understood it. That's not even how our founding fathers would have understood it. They, of course, fought for freedom. They fought, more importantly, for liberty. But liberty has a context, and its context is virtue. A drug addict is free to do drugs, I guess. Like if you have a law that says, oh, well, we can just go ahead and let you do any drugs you want, then technically you have the freedom to do drugs. But if you're a drug addict, you're not actually free. You're compelled by your habit. You are a slave to that vice. And again, the founders understood this. They understood that a person who does not have virtue, who does not have self-control, who cannot govern themselves is already a slave. And so they need to have that virtue to be able to exercise liberty. Liberty is not just the ability to do whatever you want. Liberty is the ability to pursue the good without compulsion because you are already bound by virtue, or you're already bound by those belief in the good, in a religious understanding of the world. And that's really critical because today, when we argue about the Constitution, people will just yell, but my freedoms, and we look like we're talking past each other. Because one side, when they say freedom, is, well, I should be able to do anything I want in any context. I don't care. You shouldn't have any binding power on me, your religion, all this stuff. They shouldn't have anything to say about my actions. But of course, you'll notice they never really mean that, because when they say they should be free, they want to bind you. Oh, you shouldn't have any expectations on my behavior. You shouldn't have any expectations of what I should be, or my duties to others, or my duties to my community, right? And to be fair, sometimes conservatives mean that too. Sometimes when they talk about liberty, they talk about it as if a corporation or a business or even an individual has no duty to their fellow man, no duty to their community. But of course, if we are virtuous in the sense that the founding fathers meant it, if we are people who are able to be governed by the constitutions because we have virtue that allows us to exist under a limited government framework, then we understand that we have duties to our families. We have duties to our communities. Even if we're running as a business for profit, even if we're operating a corporation, even if we're doing our own thing, we still are bound by our own virtue. Now, hopefully that means the government doesn't need to get involved in these things because the virtue exists. But remember, the virtue has to precede the liberty. It's not the other way around. If all of your business owners are corrupt, if all of your politicians are corrupt, if all of your school teachers, all of your college professors, if all of them are corrupt, then they can't self-govern. Then their liberty is useless. It's meaningless. In fact, it's dangerous, because what it does is allows them to pursue terrible ends that do not take care of the society. The Constitution and its limited government framework are only valuable insofar as the people who are operating under them have their own virtue. This is really important, again, because when we look at something like Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, he talks about looking at early American democracy and being amazed that it works because there is a network of informal institutions, voluntary associations that each part of the community makes to each other, and that allows them to cover each other in times of need. So there are all these different associations where people provide basically insurance or assistance to each other when they're poor, when they're sick, if their house burns down, if there's a tragedy, something happens. There's all of these different clubs, there's all of these different groups, there's all these different fraternal organizations, there's all these different religious organizations, and they create a social fabric, a network that covers over the needs of the community so that the government doesn't have to step in, right? So that the government doesn't need to grow large, that it doesn't need to rule with an iron fist, that it doesn't have to provide those things because those voluntary associations exist. But again, they're only going to exist if you have a virtuous population, if you have a population that will voluntarily seek to help each other, that will seek to assist each other in times of need, that will look to bind each other together into that social fabric. If everyone's just out for themselves, if everyone is just pursuing their own freedom, their own opportunity, and they don't care about their children, they don't care about their families, they don't care about their extended families, they don't care about their community, if they're only out for themselves, their profit, these things, then the Constitution cannot rule them, because these voluntarily associations that would cover the things that government wants to now cover, they won't exist. And we're seeing that now, right? We see all of these associations fall away. The things that used to be the duty of the church, that used to be the duty of your local fraternal organization, that used to be the duty of your local clubs, they now fall to the government. And that means the government gets to take power. You see, the government's power grows not by just creating bureaucracies or having new laws or taxes, though all of those things are really important. The government grows when it gets to take over responsibility, because there's a correlation between responsibility and power. When someone takes responsibility over something for you, they have power over you. That's just the nature of the situation. So as a parent, you have responsibilities over your child. If your child, goes hungry, that's your fault. If your child doesn't have clothing or a place to live, that's your fault. If your child goes out and commits a crime, they're not as liable as you are. You're the one who's actually legally liable because you have responsibility. But that also gives you power, right? That also gives you power over your child, because you have to answer for the things that they have done. The things that you provide them also give you a certain amount of power and authority over them, justly, by the way. That's the way the world should work. But if the government takes authority over these things, if it takes the role of these voluntary associations unto itself, it gets to collapse spheres of social influence. See, the church and community can push back against the government. They can limit the growth of the government because they have authority over different parts of life. If the church is the one that's taking care of you when you're sick, if the church is the one that dictates whether or not you're married, if the church is the one that made sure that your child was taken care of, even though, maybe your niece or nephew was taken care of, even though someone passed in the family, then there is a level of authority that the church gets to exert. And that allows it to push back against something like the state, because when the state comes a knocking, you say, no, I'm standing with the church because the church does all these things for me, and I then therefore give it power. And those are the things that actually limit the power of the government. Many people don't understand this. They look at the branches of government inside the Constitution, the separation of powers, right? And we think to ourselves, well, separation of powers is one of those founding principles of America, and that's what controls the government. And well, kind of, but there's a reason behind that. It's not just that there's three branches of government. There's nothing magical about the number of three or the partitioning of the government into the executive, legislative, and judicial that actually limits the power of the government. You see, Baron de Montesquieu was the philosopher that a lot of guys in America, a lot of the founding fathers were looking towards when they created the Constitution. And when the Constitution was drafted, they took large amounts of Baron de Montesquieu's ideas about controlling government, separating powers, mixing forms of government so that you would limit the government's growth. They took many of those ideas and they put them into the Constitution. He was a big influence of what happened. But it wasn't just the division of powers. It's not just, again, the magical number of three that limits the government. The reason that Baron de Montesquieu believed that separation of powers limited the government was because he believed that the key to separating the branches was separating their interests. He modeled his understanding of this after the British system at that time, which said, okay, well, the king has one interest, but then the nobles have another interest, and then the common people have another interest, and then the merchant class has another interest, and the church has another interest. And so if you divide the government up into all those different areas, if you give some power to one social sphere and some power to another, then all of those interests will work against each other, right? Because the king doesn't want the nobles to have more power, and the nobles don't want the church to have more power, and the church doesn't want, whatever. And so the way that gets divided is what's actually supposed to limit the government. It's the division of social interests and not just the branches themselves that limits government power. So in the United States, when we have a division of power in the Constitution, and we say, well, why is this failing to limit power? We need to look at the reason those limitations were put in the Constitution in the first place. What does the Constitution actually do? The Constitution itself does not actually limit the government, but what it does is it sets up a framework by which the nature of the people can limit the government by its investment in different social partitions. Okay, the family should be a key building block. The church should be a key building block. The merchant class, the government, yes, sure, academia, the media. Okay, all of these things could be key building blocks. And if we can divide power into those social spheres, then they will work against each other and they will keep the government from overwhelming, from unifying, from becoming this one total state that will rule over us. However, in the United States, we've kind of failed to do that. See, originally, our branches were divided in the way that they were selected. Remember, originally, only 1/2 of 1/3 of the government was actually elected by the people. You had the Senate, which was elected by the state legislatures. You had the president, who was actually elected by the Electoral College. That's still kind of true, but there's more to that now. You have primary systems instead of the way the presidents used to be elected. There's fewer barriers between the direct vote and the selection of the president. And of course, the judiciary is still selected by the president and confirmed by the Senate. However, as we have seen, people like Joe Biden and his press secretary now put direct pressure on the judicial system. They will even do things like illegally encourage protests outside the homes of Supreme Court justices, like they did during the Dobbs decision, in an attempt to put pressure on those people. That's why he ended up with a Supreme Court justice actually having an attempt on his life, because of the pressure and the propaganda being put out by the executive branch in their attempt to influence the judicial branch. And so what we're seeing is a breakdown of the social forces that used to protect and separate those different aspects of society from each other. And without different social forces, all the power ends up getting collapsed into the government. So as the church loses its influence, as families fall apart, these are things that the government is incentivized to encourage. The government wants these things to collapse. They want these things to fail, because as they fail, the power and influence that the family used to wield, that the church used to wield, that the civic organizations used to wield, that these regional governments used to wield, as those things fall apart, the things that were naturally supposed to limit the government also come apart. And that means that the overwhelming state, the centralized power, can consume those and add them to their repertoire of powers. We see this in every totalitarian government. Think about the Soviet Union. Think about Nazi Germany. What's the last thing they have to break to become a total state, a totalitarian state? They have to break the family. Why? Well, because the family is the final barrier to a total state, the final barrier to totalitarianism, because it limits the ability of the government to wield power in the lives of individual children. You can eventually get rid of churches and get rid of civic organizations because those things are voluntary. We choose to be part of them. But the family, well, pretty much everyone has a family naturally. And so that means that there is always that influence, always that barrier between what the state wants to do and the way that the child is raised. The parent can always impose different values in a way that the state can't. It can always get in between the state and its influence. And so if you want to have a total state, well, look at what they did in places like the Soviet Union. You have parents or children informing on parents for not being sufficiently loyal to the party. Why do you do that? Well, because if you can break the bond between parent and child, if you can break that protective bond between that most intimate connection in a human's life, then you have total control. There is no other social sphere that is as strong as the family. And so if you can break families, if you can break the power of the family and its ability to restrict the government, then there is no restriction on the government. And that's why we see that being so important to our state today, to our government today. The regime, the Biden administration, Democrats, the overall forces that are arrayed against the classic understanding of America, they want to break the family for a reason. There's a reason that they are going to use things like civil rights legislation to wedge their ways into families. They're already doing this when it comes to trans kids, right? Trying to get parents to lose custody if they don't affirm a gender transition of their child. There's a reason to that. There's a method to the madness. Yes, it's craziness. Yes, there's a religious fervor to it, but there's also a power dynamic involved. They need to break down that final barrier between the state and the child. Once they can break down that family connection, they completely own that power. And so to get back to the point of the Constitution, right? The original point of this talk, the point of a constitution is to bring forth the values that already exist in a society. And if those values aren't being practiced, then the Constitution itself can't protect them. The people have to have that virtue. The people have to have those beliefs and value structures if they're going to enforce them, if they're going to protect them from the state. Without those intermediate social spheres, without the family, without the church, without the community, the Constitution cannot stop the state. It only works if the people are the ones enforcing it, if the people are the ones believing it. It only works if it's an accurate reflection of the beliefs of the people. And so if you want the Constitution to start working again, if you want the Constitution to start restricting government again, the first thing you need is a virtuous population. Thanks for joining me, guys. Again, if you'd like to go ahead and watch more of this, I've got my own podcast, the Auron MacIntyre podcast. You can catch it on any podcast platform. And I've got my own YouTube channel, Auron MacIntyre. Thanks again to Jenna Ellis. She'll be back soon. Great talking to you guys.
With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
My friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help you get the best night's sleep of your life. He didn't stop at the pillow. Mike also created the Giza Dream bed sheets. I have them. I love them. These sheets look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep, which is crucial for our overall health. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's latest deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets marketing prices down as low as $29.98, depending on the size. So go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code Jenna, Jenna. There, you'll find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and so much more. I have all of this. I love it. Everything from MyPillow and also mystore.com. You can use promo code Jenna. So go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, and also mystore.com. And remember, use the promo code Jenna.